To be honest, I don't really know how to start this video, so I'm just gonna jump right into the basics. My name is Jordan. I'm a 21-something-year-old college dropout. I was born and raised in Philadelphia, and this is more or less my story, my political journey, my philosophical journey, whatever you want to call it. Right now, I would call myself a democratic socialist, but I've had a pretty long political transformation history. For a very long period of time, I was a conservative, borderlining on fascism, to be completely honest. I wanted to tell my story not just as a conservative and how I fell down that radicalization rabbit hole, but also as a black conservative. I don't think there are a lot of black leftist voices being heard right now, and I'm someone who has a lot of knowledge on the other side in terms of their thought processes and things like that. And so I just wanted to share my story. I feel like our side being leftist, being progressives, whatever you want to call it, we sometimes tend to throw out the baby with the bathwater, so to speak. Like, we sometimes tend to just disregard our political opposition, despite the fact that more or less what we're fighting for is going to benefit them, you know. And don't get me wrong, like, dealing with a bunch of white Trump supporters in a Rust Belt state, it can be very exhausting, and a lot of times some of those people do hold despicable opinions and do despicable actions that might anger us to not necessarily want to give them a great amount of sympathy. But I think the most important thing to do is to understand that the biggest enemy of us has the potential to be the biggest ally, and that there are a lot of people who are good people who are simply caught up in something that they don't fully understand. And that's just why I wanted to give my perspective and tell you about my journey from being at that point to where I am now. So I was born in 1998 in Germantown, which is a section of North Philadelphia. My parents, they weren't married. For my early life, like pre-K life, I had lived in my mom's childhood home in Germantown. Now, my grandfather, he was a pretty decorated Philadelphia police veteran. He was also a former Navy veteran. You can imagine the sort of household that my parents had grown up to, or rather my mom had grown up in. My dad was a different story, pretty much on the whole opposite side of the spectrum in terms of being this dude who was like in the trenches from Brooklyn growing up in the 80s, so you can only imagine the type of stuff that he's lived through and everything like that. Similarly, my mom was a correctional officer. She had a lot of different jobs, but she had my family's on my mother's side's relationship with like law enforcement and that sort of like, I don't know what you want to say, that like sort of like kind of militant branch of the service of this like state services, police officers, army. Like, there was a lot of that in my family, and there was a lot of that sort of like atmosphere in my family. So after my grandfather passed away, my mom had moved me and her into my aunt's house, and my aunt had lived in Cheltenham, which if you don't know, Cheltenham is the home of Lil Dicky and Benjamin Netanyahu. Okay, so it's a suburb. Just think of it like very basic, everyday suburb. It's right out on the outskirts of Philadelphia. Literally, you can cross the street and be in Philadelphia, and then you cross the street and then you're in Cheltenham. So just anything, very, it was a rich, peaceful, serene, mostly white, although I will say growing up, there was a fair amount of diversity. That is the atmosphere that I had grew up in from beginning at first grade. I had lived in Cheltenham from moving to Philadelphia. The Cheltenham school districts were, very good in terms of early education. I had a lot of like phenomenal educational resources at a young age, which is something that I definitely, I think, owe to any sort of intelligence or education that I hold today. Definitely, learning how to read and write very well at a young age, having books, scholastic book fairs, and having all those resources, and growing up in that sort of area where I was able to learn and like enjoy learning. I would say that I was a normal kid. I had a strong friend group that I talked to. I was social. I didn't get into a whole lot of trouble in my like elementary school days. Now my mother had worked from the time she was 13, but very close to the time where she found out she was pregnant with me, she also found out that she was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, which around the time of first grade had progressed to the point where she was unable to continue her job as a property manager, and she was forced to start getting into Social Security disability, which for the grand majority of my life was the only form of income for me and my family. That and like child support payments by my father, which wasn't a whole lot of money at the time. And if you're not familiar with how much money you get for Social Security disability, it's not a whole lot. I think it's like edges around maybe $24,000 to $25,000 a year. So but at the time growing up, while I knew that my family might not have been the richest family, I for the most part was able to keep up the appearances of being rich, so to speak. Like as a kid, you have no concept of the value of money or anything like that. We lived in a house that was just like everybody else's. We occasionally had things. We went on vacation and stuff. So growing up, I knew I would hear my mom say things about like how we had to save money, how maybe they couldn't afford certain toys for me. And like I kind of understood that maybe we weren't rich, but in terms of how close we were to poverty, I had absolutely no idea. Now, going into 5th grade, I had started to get bullied a lot. As you can see, I'm a pretty big guy, and I was always a big, like, chunky, fat kid. And I used to get bullied a lot about my weight, and that had kind of led later down the line to like a lot of body dysmorphia and like a lot of anxiety and depression that would continue to increase as I got older, would continue to get worse as I got older. Around the 5th or 6th grade mark is where maybe it's just because I was becoming older and more aware of things, I started to kind of recognize the class divide between me and like a lot of the other suburban kids. Most of my friends in my friend group, they were coming from 2-parent families. They were coming from these decent breadwinner families, and I was coming from not living with my father in the home, which was one thing that I kind of had to deal with as a kid, not having my dad necessarily as around as I wanted him to be around, but also not having as much money for the other kids. You know what I mean? Like I had the Obama phones, everybody else had like the iPhone touches and everything else. I used to wear, this isn't necessarily a poor thing, but I just had no sense of style. When I was like 5th and 6th grade, I used to always wear like sweatpants and like sweatshirts, and I used to like tie them around my waist and like wear them like a little cape or something. It was just a mess. I didn't get Nikes. I don't think I got my first pair of Nikes until I was like legit like 14. But I used to wear Shaqs, and oh my god, stepping on the school bus with a pair of Shaqs, you were getting roasted. So that, looking back at it, I can kind of laugh at it, but at the time that was something that like really made me feel bad and kind of didn't lead to my or rather didn't help improve my mental health at the time, and like mental capacity and stuff like that. This kind of led to me being like really socially isolated. And I kind of became very nerdy. I was like very into like pop culture and media and cartoons and superheroes, and I was into like cryptozoology and like wanted to talk to kids about Bigfoot and stuff. So I was like that weird like geeky nerdy kid at the school. And as you can imagine, like in like early 2000s and stuff, a lot of that stuff wasn't like really mainstream cool at that time. So it was kind of like difficult for me a lot of times to make friends, and what that ended up leading to was me spending a lot of the majority of my time just at home, watching TV, or like for the most part browsing the internet, which is a pretty big thing. Is that I was exposed to like the internet, and I was on the internet a lot as a child. Leading up to 7th grade, my mom and aunt were going through kind of like arguments or whatever, and basically we had ended up having to move out of Cheltenham and go back to Philadelphia. My mom was able to secure a housing choice voucher for us to have like an affordable apartment. So, you know, you can imagine being like this suburban black kid who has lived in Cheltenham and Elkins Park with like a pretty diverse group of people and taking the school bus every day. And now I was going to a charter school close to the Philadelphia Zoo. So I had to take like the train and trolleys and buses to get to school every day rather than just taking the school bus. And there was a pretty big culture shock for me, just simply because I just wasn't part of like a lot of the typical growing up in like an urban environment that like a lot of black people in urban environments have like, you know, gotten, you know. I didn't like play outside. I didn't play basketball at all. In fact, I was very unathletic as a child. A big thing was that people at my new majority, which was like 99% black, urban black students, by the way, they used to say I talked white. like I would use words that, you know, maybe weren't as colloquial as some certain others. I didn't know any slang. I used to I never understood rap music. I had to really rediscover a lot of rap because I didn't grow up necessarily listening to just rap music. I used to talk about how much I love Queen and how much I love rock and roll music, and that wasn't necessarily I kind of had a hard time fitting in, which led to me being more isolated. And as you can imagine, someone who is just sitting in the house all day, I started to gain weight. I sort of developed the eating disorder that sort of because I would be bored all day, from sitting in the house all day. I didn't have any friends, and so I was just one of those people who ate when they were bored. And that's still a problem that I have to deal with today, is that I eat when I'm bored, and it's just as you can imagine, that led to me gaining a lot of weight. I'm a pretty big guy right now, but I was a decent, no joke, 200 pounds heavier than what I am currently right now. I think the whole talking white thing is something that a lot of black people who might have had similar backgrounds to me deal with. It's definitely something I've talked to with some of my other black male friends who are smart people and very eloquent or well spoken. They have a decent vocabulary. Is that there's this sort of awkwardness sometimes between how we might think as opposed to maybe other black people who might not have had the educational opportunities as us. What ends up happening is that there's this because of this social and emotional disconnect, we tend to separate ourselves. And even though we're both, let's say me and you are both black men, we might find reasons to disregard our experiences as being authentic black experiences for XYZ reasons. And that's a major problem that even today we're still dealing with. And with these sort of insecurities that had continued to grow with me, because I already didn't necessarily have a good body image of myself, and now I really felt I always want to stress this, I didn't hate being black. I wasn't ashamed of being black or anything, but more so this perception of what it meant to be black, what it meant to be a black man. That was that thing that I just disliked, because I felt like I was being held to this standard of living that I didn't necessarily was interested in. You know what I mean? It was difficult, talking to my other black male classmates about, whatever dreams or aspirations that I wanted to achieve, and maybe they wanted to achieve. And I don't want to make it sound like they are their thoughts or opinions were lower than mine, but if you're wanting to be a rapper, or you wanting to be an NBA basketball player, or you wanting to be certain things, you know what I mean? And I might have this disconnect because I went to a school where they reinforced from a very young age, you can be an engineer, you can be a scientist, you can be a politician, you can be a lawyer, you can be all these things. So my mindset as a child was different necessarily than I think a lot of my other black classmates at the time, and that had kind of led to this resentment of not necessarily black people, but this concept of blackness that I felt like I had to follow. And again, just like a self-eating fire, this led to me becoming even more disconnected, to the point where I'm not even joking, I would probably enter my room like 4:30 on Friday and not leave until it's time to go to work that Monday, not talk to a single person as a friend, like in real life. You know, I had a lot of parasocial relationships. I was a part of a lot of different internet communities and things like that. And essentially, I was this person who was lonely, who was isolated, and who was insecure. But however, I think I had that potential of being smart, but not necessarily being educated yet. If that, you know what I mean? Like, you can be smart. The difference from, I guess, having the capacity to do things versus actually knowing the things to do, so to speak. There's a difference for that. And I think I was smart at that age, but I definitely wasn't educated, which unfortunately all those characteristics are a very bad combination, and it kind of led to my radicalization. As I said before, I spent a lot of time on the internet, and I was a part of a lot of different like fandoms and like social online groups that were like taking off in like the 2010s going into 2020. And among those were like browsing different internet sites or like places that are common internet traffic hubs, among them being 4chan. Yeah, that's right. I was one of those filthy lurkers on 4chan, and a lot of people might be wondering, like, why 4chan? Like, why that site out of all the, potential social hubs that you can be having? And it really isn't no specific reason. I mean, 4chan wasn't quite as shitty as it is today, about like 6 or 7 years ago. I mean, don't get me wrong, they still had everything that's present there, with the racism and the super just like far like weird like far gone type of posts, but there were some like more just like internet, you get into the internet culture of just like posting memes and making edgy jokes, and those were the type of things that I enjoyed at the time. And naturally, being on a site that allows, even if it's not necessarily based on, but the fact that it's allowing these like far right content, Nazis and talking points and stuff, those, the overall culture is going to start being a far right conservative atmosphere, and that's exactly what happened. And the more time I spent on that, the more time I had started to absorb a lot of these talking points. It's like these pipelines that exist that like capitalize on the insecurities of all their viewers. So as like a 16-year-old boy who had body dysmorphia issues, that was lonely, this was something that was very easy for me to get like attached to these sort of very toxic sort of like incel-y ways of thinking about girls, about dating, about different concepts of like marriage and things like that. These those sort of atmospheres are really poison for your mind when it comes to things like that. In general, I just think that puberty is at least especially for boys, just this really dangerous time where we feel super insecure, we feel like we have a lot of things to prove, and a lot of men don't grow out of that sort of insecure, woe is me, like the world owes me something mindset, and especially in terms of our relationships with women or with like ideals such as feminism or like female sexual liberation and stuff like that. There is deep insecurities that have us, like young men, feel certain ways about certain things. Gamergate had just happened, and I'm for those of you who know anything about Gamergate, they know that that was almost a huge precedent for a lot of that anti-social justice warrior atmosphere that was being fostered online in the 2010s, and that whole sort of anti-SJW culture was a real rabbit hole that a lot of people ended up falling down, including myself. Now, really quickly, a couple of points that I really want to emphasize just about myself setting up my intro into radicalization. Number one, I fucking loved conspiracies. Like, as a kid, I was like fascinated with 9/11, and that kind of led to, of course, the whole, jet fuel doesn't melt steel beams, that sort of conspiratorial mindset of like, oh, this is orchestrating through the government. And like, as like a young, person, and like I said, I was a nerd. That stuff is really interesting. That shit is like really like fascinating, and I was very big on conspiracies. I had believed in a lot of conspiracies that I don't even care to mention because they're kind of embarrassing. But I don't believe in anymore, of course. And number two is that my mom's side of the family were very religious, and they were Baptist, so they weren't like extremely like conservative people per se, but naturally with there being the American Christian ideals of conservatism, there's going to be some natural social conservatism that's going to be held by a lot of Christians, at least if they let their Christianity or their understanding of religion make certain pressures on certain social groups rather than the other one. Unfortunately for me, I took it definitely a more evangelical route in terms of my religion. I was definitely used my religious beliefs as a real driver of a lot of my political beliefs. So you can imagine what that would look like when it comes to things like social issues. From 4chan came, YouTube, and then that's when we started getting into like really the who's who in terms of like these right-wing political forces. Sargon of Akkad, Stefan Molyneux, Ben Shapiro, Steven Crowder. I watched all of these people. I watched almost like exclusively all of these people for great periods of time. And needless to say, if you're Prager University is another one. If you keep on watching these types of things, there's something that happens to your brain. Your brain starts to rot. Your brain starts to perceive this world in this like very nonsensical, conspiratorial, like right-wing agenda, and you start seeing things that don't really exist. You start believing in things in ways that don't actually make a whole lot of sense. I believed in such concepts as cultural Marxism, which obviously all the dog whistling, all the anti-Semitic dog whistling aside, led to a lot of capitalist talking points. Like I said, a lot of my political opinions in terms of my intro to conservatism came from religion, and I would say that was mostly in terms of social issues. But with these social issues, very clearly they jump right into the economic issues and how socialism is this concept made up by these godless heathen Soviet individuals, and it led to this cultural degradation of society, and all these all these talking points that we see repeated to this day. They were all being repeated back then, and these were the type of things that I used to believe in. I'd say that there was a huge cognitive dissonance when it came to holding certain Republicans accountability and also holding certain Democrats accountability. The idea of like, hey, maybe all politicians do certain things that I dislike that are bad for society was like going out the window. And it was like, oh yeah, sure, there might be some corrupt Republicans, but overall the Democratic establishment and the very foundation of the Democrat Party, that was the real problem. So there was this cognitive dissonance in terms of like, I would be able to turn a blind eye to bad things Republicans do, while also being extremely super critical of things that the Democrat Party did. There's a lot of projection of hate when it comes to social conservative views, It's a mixture of your own self-loathing, your own insecurities that you're pushing onto other people, but also just at the same time, there's also a lot of narcissism because, or maybe if not narcissism, then at least a severe lack of humility that comes with conservatism, because you're in this sort of judgmental mindset where you can sit on this high horse and make huge judgments about people, groups of people that you don't know, you don't understand, you don't know the concept, or rather you don't know the context of their life, you don't know anything that could be influencing their behavior, and you sit on this high horse and you point fingers at other people and you say, hey, well, you shouldn't do this because XYZ reasons, because ABC is right, completely not giving a shit about context, not giving a shit about anything that could have influenced those people's behaviors. Just an example of some of the radical political points that I had, I believe that only people who own land should be allowed to vote. Like, come on. Like, that, it's really cringe to even admit this, but I'm being honest. These are things that I believed in. I was pro-life, absolutely no exceptions, including rape or incest. I was completely for the privatization of most services, including schooling, including healthcare. I wanted flat tax rates. I wanted the immediate removal of all undocumented immigrants. And mind you that all these beliefs had started and had stemmed from simply me enjoying content that was that was dunking on or making fun of opinions or belief systems that I felt insecure about participating in. And it's really important to note that I went from anti-SJW compilations to reporting fascist talking points proudly very fast. And you don't know at the time that you are being a fascist or that you are being racist. Now, and I'll say this, as a black man also, I was intoxicated by the whole idea of the Democrat plantation that you see with Kanye West and Candace Owens, the whole black sit, the whole Democrats are the real racist sort of idea. As someone who had known that my mom had worked her whole life and that she still was not allowed to get a job as a result of receiving Social Security disability, I somehow had flipped it in my head that it was the Democrats' fault, even though without the Democrats we wouldn't be getting Social Security disability. Again, I was angry primarily at the concept of neoliberalism and what they do to the working class, and inadvertently that had led me to believing more of neoconservatism, the borderline fascist ideologies, as opposed to leftist ideology. Some of the more anti-socialist ideas, that I see a lot among libertarians, among right-wingers, among neoliberals, is this conflation of socialism, like the tenets and economic principles of socialism, with state control. I was pretty much overdosed on anti-communist propaganda, the Hoppy and Snake memes, and talking about, I forget the name, the dictator, the ruthless dictator of Peru, I believe, who used to throw out, Pinochet, I think. He used to throw out communists out of, helicopters. He used to make jokes about that and things like that, not realizing that I'm basically sympathizing with a fascist dictator, But he hated people who I had made myself hate, therefore they were good to me. It's a sort of enemy of my enemy is my friend type of thing, which is, I think, a lot of what conservatism is based off of. Not necessarily that those ideas are good for them, but that those ideas hurt people that they dislike. And that's a really big thing that I want to get across. So by this time, I was almost done high school, and I had morphed from this sort of nerdy, sort of loser kid to this young adult who was very sure of themselves, very sure of the world, thought they understood how the world worked, and was very much into that whole dunking on the left, on that whole idea of bravado of this is the ideal sort of way that I should be living, and this is how you should be living, and if we all just pulled our pants up and pulled our bootstraps up, the black community and everybody would be a lot better off. And I was one attended to show that when I went off to college, and I majored in political science, and I went to this I got enrolled in this private Christian school where I was going to be surrounded by like-minded individuals, and I was so sure of myself, but needless to say, that's not exactly what came to fruition, so to speak. So college was very quickly not what I expected it to be. Not only were most people there not even Christian per se, they certainly didn't adhere to my sort of high standards of proper Christian behavior. A lot of the people there were just regular people, normal, everyday, white, bourgeois, upper middle class, people who I had kind of grew up with in the first half of my childhood versus the second half, and they did basically anything that young adults would do at a non-Christian school. And this at first it really bothered me. But to be honest, like the social conservatism and all the rules and regulations that goes with that, even at my most stuffy, still wasn't really my style. I never really enjoyed doing any of the stuff. It's just that I felt this, like, I had this mental, like, obligation to have certain behavioral characteristics, because I thought that, you know, everything that happened to you in life and where you were going to be in life were all a result of your behavior, and, like, you had full control over all those things. Not soon after I got to school, I started experimenting with like drugs and alcohol for like the first time. I never, you know, grew up with any of that stuff. Like I said, I didn't have friends, so you usually don't end up drinking or you know, doing any types of drugs until you have friends or in some sort of social group where that type of stuff is happening. But you know, I had never had that before, and you know, the stereotype of a you know, like the pastor's kid who has been stuffy all their life, and then they have all this freedom. Well, they're not going to know how to act. You know, they're not going to know how to manage themselves. They're not going to have control and moderation in some of their behaviors. And even though I, at this point, I had been eating really healthy and I had been losing a lot of weight, I was actually way lighter than I am right now. I was still deeply unhappy because I was still stuck in this very toxic mindset. You know, like I said, this sort of like conservative, just mind rot in terms of being unnecessarily judgmental to people, being like almost inflicting this like miserableness on myself, because not only was I critical of everyone else, I also had in my head that everyone was critical of me as well, and so I was very self-conscious about anything that I did. I was that class conservative. If anybody is watching this is in college, or you know, takes like a political science class or anything remotely political, you know that there's always that one guy in the class who's like always has some like dumb stupid shit to say, always has some like conservative talking point to say, and they always arguing with the professor. And I was that guy, and I cannot tell you how many times I've had full-blown arguments or like debates and like completely derailed the lesson plans because I'm trying to I was like, at least for that freshman year especially, I was trying to argue some right-wing talking point. On literally my first day of class, this was when the Colin Kaepernick thing had like first started, so like 4 years ago, and I had some very stupid take about why Colin Kaepernick shouldn't be the face of Black Lives Matter or anti-police brutality because he was half white. That was like my angle that I was going through. Not the smartest argument, not the best points I could have been making at the time. And I also I love the joke of like the conservative who goes to college and then they like conservatives say they get indoctrinated or they get brainwashed by Marxist professors, and I always think that's funny because my political science unit was very small at my school, and there were two full-time professors there, and both of them were Marxists. Like both of them were like one was more of the like I don't want to call her a tanky because she's more educated than like the normal everyday tanky. She's actually like an older person who was like brought up in that sort of very revolutionary era of America. So I'm not gonna like shit on her the same way I would shit on like some other tanky. And then we had another guy who was very like into the philosophical sort of thing. He was very into like he was very much that like I think I would call him a soy boy or like a beta male if I was a conservative. Like he was like that caricature of like that like soft white guy. You know, he would wear shirts that are like proud feminists and all this stuff. And so as a conservative going in, he was like my fucking number one enemy. I fucking hated him. But as life at my school went on, I started to try new experiences, you know, having real freedom for the first time, having a nice social group for the first time, and more importantly, the friend group that I had were extremely diverse, but in a different way than how I was in Cheltenham. You know, I had people who were coming from different parts of the world, and just learning about them and their cultures had made me more sympathetic to a lot of the problems that were facing not only my demographic that I just ignored or didn't care about, but other people's demographics. Like, it's one thing to like kind of read about feminism, right? And there's another thing, and I always tell this story to people. Me and some friends, we had went to a party in Philly, and there was and one of my friends, she's like a very small, she's like 4 foot like something like girl. and we were at this party, and like from my perspective, she had been talking to a guy and like hanging out with some guy that she had met at the party for like pretty much the entirety, and it looked like she was cool and like okay with that. But turns out after the party was over, she was like, oh, why didn't you like come get me? Like I wanted to leave. I'm like, well, why didn't you just tell him to like fuck off, or why didn't you just like leave? And essentially it's like, me as a man, I didn't understand the concept that, oh, she might be afraid that guy might have a physical violent reaction, not even physical, that it might have some sort of violent reaction and make her feel bad. Because man, I wasn't used to that type of stuff. In my mind, if someone's bothering you, I've been allowed to always speak my mind as a man. And just things like that, and like situations and experiences like that, where I had to really rethink myself. And no joke aside, I had to check my privilege and I understand that I had a certain worldview based off of not just how I thought, but who I was as a person. As I continue to become more and more educated, I was forced to kind of renounce a lot of my views, simply because I'm just someone who I hate being wrong about things. I like to be right, and after a certain point, you're going to have to let go of a lot of those conservative beliefs if you're engaging with the educational material in a fair and honest way. And that is something that I wanted to do. I wanted to engage, and when I'm reading these philosophers like Machiavelli and Rousseau, and these like very like fundamental philosophers, that I was not looking at it as a conservative, but just looking at it and understanding it as Jordan, as like the person. I will say though that I do think that my demographic as a black man did play a huge part in my ability to even deprogram myself. As a black man living in America, and even living on a majority white, rich campus, I was forced to kind of see certain differences in behavior. If I see somebody who is seemingly afraid of me for no other reason other than they might be intimidated by the fact that I'm like a black man, that's something that it's hard to ignore after a certain point. It's hard to keep those blinders on and pretend that you're not acknowledging that you're being treated differently because of who you were. I finally got to the point where literally I just, I was having a pretty big, or rather a pretty bad mental health week, and I kind of just renounced everything. I renounced my religious beliefs, I renounced my political beliefs, my philosophical beliefs, and I just said, hey, I'm going to go about this in a way that, I'm going to like relearn everything I know about the world. Like I just kind of started with a blank slate, and from that moment, and don't get me wrong, that was a very, it might seem sort of casual when I'm saying it, but that was a very hard thing for me to do. That was a very like stressful mental thing, because I had to admit that not only have I been wrong, but I've been wrong and loud for these last like 2 years, and in my entirety of high school. I had to realize that my beliefs were only harmful, but I could have offended or hurt people that were around me. As the years went by, I'm not going to tell every single step of my, journey, because, this video is pretty long already, but, I just essentially, you learn new things and you have experience, and you get your feet dirty, and you start being like a real adult for the first time, and you have a different perspective of life. And I look at myself now, and I'm like very cool and like confident, not only in myself but in what I believe. And I am just not like very, and I mean this in not a small way at all, I'm just not the same person that I was when I was a conservative. Almost like a very deep spiritual death and rebirth and all that type of stuff. Like, just not the same person, just factually. So, in conclusion, I just wanted to go over a couple things that I thought were like very important about my journey that I really want to get across to certain. Number one is that right-wing radicalization can happen to any person of any demographic. Okay, I know obviously when we're dealing with white supremacy and neo-Nazism, a lot of times there's like a certain demographic that we're going to want to identify as being right-wing. But as time goes on, and there's a lot more contemporary ignorance, so to speak. Like, there's a lot more diversity on the right as it grows. So I think that we have to be not only confident in being able to engage in black people or any other minorities who are saying false things, that are saying certifiably wrong, incorrect information. You have to be confident in speaking out against that evil. And just remember that someone's demographic never justifies what they believe in, so to speak. So just because you are a black person doesn't mean that you have the interests of black people in mind. Just because you're a woman doesn't mean you have the interests of women in mind. You have to be able to look at things in a nuanced way, and let people of their demographics both have the autonomy to express themselves and the autonomy to express certain problems that are going on with them, but also be able to recognize that just because one black person is saying something like institutional racism isn't real, doesn't mean that that's reflective of the overall black experience. Secondly, I wanted to point out that right-wing radicalization feeds on people's insecurities. So combating insecurities are pretty much going to be the number one thing in terms of getting people not radicalized. And this is something that is hard to do. It's something that it's hard because you never know exactly when you're putting down a certain group of people. You never know when, things are just jokes, and I'm not a politically correct person at all. Like, I'm absolutely just not. Even now, I wouldn't identify as a politically correct person. But it's just about being nice to other people, just treating people the way you want to be treated. There's just a lot of real nastiness going on in politics. There's a lot of wanting to hurt the other side emotionally, rather than trying to come to some sort of conclusion or to some sort of political policy or point that we can meet on or anything like that. So just being nice to other people, I think, is going to go a long way in making sure that these people can't be feasted on by these right-wing predators who are waiting for people who are self-conscious, waiting for people who are angry against society and the world to indoctrinate in their hatred and in their stupid ideologies. And lastly, I wanted to say that these types of deprogramming conservatives could, I feel like, only really come from people who have personal connections with that person. No conservative is going to have their mind changed by me or some random other leftist or progressive political commentator. If you are somebody who knows that a member of your family is right-wing in every way, shape, or form, while it may be difficult to be able to talk to that person to get them out of that mindset, know that you have the better chance of doing that than any other person. You know that person more so than I do. You know the things that they value more so than anybody else, and that person has more respect for you than anybody else. And you know what I mean? So you have that obligation to combat those people in your personal life, whether it be family, friends, co-workers, those types of people who are not giving a respect to other demographics, who are saying false political information. You're going to be the president of that change. All of that is that's our obligation as progressives, as leftists, is that we have to be those torchbearers. We have to be those types of people to go out in the society and try to make it a better place. And that's it, guys. Thank you so much for this very, very long-ass video. It's taken me a long time to record it. It's probably going to take me even longer to edit it. If you've made it through this far, I thank you very much for listening to my story. Hopefully there's something here that, you can learn from or relate to. And if so, make sure you leave a comment below. Please make sure you like and subscribe. Doing those things are going to help me out so much as our channel continues to grow. And I have a lot more things planned for this channel. I know I say it all the time, but I will see you guys the next time, and have a good, safe, happy quarantine. See you later.